Hi everyone, I'm back. It's been a while, but hopefully I'll be back to do this regularly. The idea will be hopefully that I'll be doing this at least 4 days per week, weekdays usually, with different news and stuff. But today, I'm here to finally finish off talking about Twilight Zone 2019 by Jordan Peele and CBS All Access. If you didn't see my first 4 reviews, I reviewed The Comedian, Nightmare at 30,000 Feet, Replay, and A Traveler in previous videos, but then I got behind and it took a while to catch up, and after a certain point I just decided I'll wait till the whole series is out and then I'll kind of review it all at once. So if you want to hear what I have to say about the first 4 episodes, go check those previous 2 reviews where I did 2 each, and today we're just going to be finishing up the season and talking about how the season was overall and what I'm expecting out of Season 2. So the first one we're going to be talking about is The Wunderkind, starring John Cho and Jacob Tremblay. Jacob Tremblay, I believe, was the kid actor in The Room with Brie Larson. Really good kid actor, and I think he does an excellent job here. The premise of The Wunderkind is basically that a child becomes an internet sensation for his, bullshit YouTube speech about what he would do if he was president, but it's, all platitudes and things that kids would think, and it's all innocent and sweet. John Cho, being a disgraced former campaign manager, as a publicity stunt, decides to take this kid on and actually run him for president. Of course, this being the Twilight Zone, he wins. Of course, this is a pretty thinly veiled metaphor, as many of the episodes this season are. This episode in particular is about President Trump, but I really enjoyed the episode because it reminded me a lot of, and this is probably intentional, It's a Good Life from the original series, in which you had the little kid with the psychic powers controlling a town. And I think it really captured the terror of being under the rule of someone who's effectively a pernicious, vicious little shit of a child, and I think that was captured pretty well. I think where it lacked was they needed to show consequences for more of what the kid was doing. For instance, one of his policies in the episode is he wants free video games for everyone, or something like that. They didn't really follow through on what that would mean. They had him make these ridiculous proclamations, and he threw temper tantrums, and all that was very real and very creepy and kind of disturbing, but we never saw his actual policy making be detrimental to society as a whole until perhaps the very, very end. And even then, I thought that twist was a little... You could see it kind of from a mile away because of the framing device of the episode. The twist at the end is John Cho's character needs some sort of surgery because the kid basically has the Secret Service shoot him because he's not going along with his iron fist rule anymore. And earlier in the episode, the kid had made a rule that doctors can't be old people. So when he goes to the hospital, the doctor's like a kid. And I get it. The metaphor for this episode is essentially, you shouldn't let these annoying, loud children in the form of adults like Donald Trump or whoever you want to put in this particular role. You shouldn't let these people rule things, because people without expertise, despite the fact that sometimes they'll be very loud, that doesn't mean they're qualified to do the job. So the kid at the end being the doctor also is showing that if you allow society to drop to that level, we all suffer. I get that, but I feel like they could have done it in a different way that didn't feel so tacked on. It definitely felt like they staple gunned that to the end of the episode to be like, all right, there's your Twilight Zone twist ending. And it wasn't terrible. I didn't get taken out of the episode or anything, but that was definitely a flaw. The performances were good though, and John Cho definitely, I feel you, man. I feel you. So the next episode, 6 Degrees of Freedom. This is a really interesting episode. This one feels a little bit more like a classic Twilight Zone episode to me, or maybe an Outer Limits episode, but the premise of this one is pretty good too. There's scientists and engineers who are astronauts on a Mars mission. They're on the launch pad ready to launch, and it turns out that North Korea starts basically World War III, and the entire world is launching nukes, and the only thing they can do is launch their rocket and start on their trip to Mars, and then they have to spend, the year or two or however long it took them to get to Mars, knowing that everyone they loved is dead because there's no communications left with the Earth, the implication being, like, everyone died. And they start getting paranoid, they get into fights, they get into relationships, which they're not allowed to do because they have only so much rations, so they can't afford to get one of them pregnant. It's a really good episode, and I think what holds this one together for the most part is you really believe the camaraderie between these people. There are scenes where they're singing together, and there's like a birthday party. Like, I really believe these people trained together for years for this mission, and at the last minute they had all their hopes and dreams for this mission ripped away from them, but this is all they have left, so they still have to do it. That was the strength of this episode, was the genuine companionship and understanding you felt between these people. The climax, let's say, of the episode is when one of the scientists decides, you know what, I don't think this is real. I think we're being tricked and this is all a test, and we're really on the launch pad or whatever. This is all a test to see what happens to astronauts under stress. The Earth is fine. And then they go to the airlock and get blown out into space and die. Or at least we think at the time. And the astronauts make their way to Mars. They land. Everything's good. Of course, this being the Twilight Zone, there is a little bit of a twist at the end where, indeed, they were being tested, but it was not by NASA. They were being tested by some sort of extraterrestrial force that was trying to see if humans were worthy of being saved. So I think the implication is that indeed the Earth didn't explode, but the beginning of the episode definitely talks about like climate change and wars and famines and sickness and things, and how humanity's sort of on the brink. So it's this idea that the thing that will save us is not fighting with one another, but staying together and working together as a human family to try and accomplish the goals and solve the problems that we have. And I think that's kind of a nice message. It's a little cheesy at the end for sure, because the guy that got blown out of the airlock, it turns out, he just fell out of the simulation. They're sort of in a holographic stasis chamber thing. They don't really go into it, but it looks holographic or something. And he falls out and falls into a tub of goo or something. That was a little cheesy, but it's a Twilight Zone, so I didn't mind it. Not a bad episode. One of the stronger ones of the season, if you're not into the social episodes that talk about, identity and stuff, you'll probably like this one. But it was a lot of fun. So then we get, this one. Ooh boy, this one is gonna get controversial. Episode 7, Not All Men, starring Taissa Farmiga. She was from, what's the show? American Horror Story. Yeah, she was pretty good in this as well. It's called Not All Men. The episode starts with her on a date with a coworker, and the date goes, let's say, south. The man she's on this date with gets very pushy, and wants to sleep with her, and then starts gaslighting her, and then gets violent. Earlier on the date, there was a meteor shower, and they had gone and picked up this red meteor that was very focused on, like, ooh, this is weird and extraterrestrial. She leaves the house after he starts getting violent, and slowly as the episode continues, we find that men in the town, especially after this meteor shower, and they've been picking up these rocks. Some of them have been shooting the rocks in, like, alcohol and drinks and getting other people to drink the drinks and water that's contaminated with this meteor dust. And it's creating very violent, very what you would call prototypical toxic masculinity type men, like to the max, dialed up to 11. They're getting into fights. They're telling women to constantly smile on the street, like in a violent way. They're like stalking them. They're fighting each other like to the death. And some people are going to say a lot of the episodes in this season are definitely very on the nose as far as their political commentary, but as the show went on, I stopped seeing that as like a mistake they were making, because it's so consistent. It's clearly a choice that they're making, and you can like that choice or not like that choice, but I kinda dig it. The show is almost confrontational in how in your face it is with what is happening on screen. You literally in this episode had men in a fountain fighting with each other and shouting, "Facts don't care about your feelings." And I don't think it's a coincidence that the meteors were red and people were shooting them like pills. Like, did taking the red pill, So, I don't know, I found it compelling in the same way that, like, Rosemary's Baby or The Stepford Wives is a really good horror. I'd call it, like, women horror or female horror or something like that. Something that really preys on the fears of women in society and how they feel their role in society and the particular vulnerabilities of that role because of the power that men tend to have. Both literal in the sense of men are bigger, stronger, usually more imposing, and also political power. So it was very interesting, and I found the reactions to this episode to be kind of funny. I spend a lot of time on Reddit, and the Twilight Zone subreddit. If you're a fan of this show, by the way, please go to the Twilight Zone subreddit. It needs some balance. Holy shit. It seems like there's a ton of boomers on there that, like, watched the original Twilight Zone, but didn't realize how political it was, because they're claiming that this is uniquely SJW or whatever. There was literally a post the other day that was like, this should be called the SJW zone. Like, if you don't particularly like the left-leaning politics of this show, that's okay, but you can't pretend this is a new thing for the show. Please go back and watch all the episodes of the original Twilight Zone, not just the Burgess Meredith, I lost my glasses, oh woe is me, I'm blind and can't read my books episodes, but like the myriad of episodes that directly address social issues of the time, like racism. Like, come on, this is what the show is about, guys, often. Rod Serling was incredibly liberal for his time. Go listen to some of his talks. He did a talk at a college once that I watched. It's about an hour long. It's very interesting. But he was definitely a very liberal, progressive guy and wanted that to come across in his stories. He would not be against this if he were somehow alive today and aware of the political climate. But anyway, that's Not All Men. I thought it was fun. It's definitely confrontational if you don't agree with the message, but I found it interesting. I thought it was pretty good. Point of Origin. This one I thought was a little boring because within the first 5 minutes you kind of get it. The premise of this one is that there's sort of a white, well-to-do, rich woman, sort of a waspy type woman, and she has a Hispanic housekeeper and sort of nanny to her children, who gets, her door gets broken down and she gets taken by what you assume is INS. And later she also gets taken by INS. The obvious parallel being like, hey, think about what it's like to be in another person's shoes. Yeah, so you have a white woman, well-to-do, going through the same process as an illegal immigrant, essentially. There's, of course, a Twilight Zone twist thrown in there where they're actually refugees from another dimension, but you kind of get it. Once you see, like, oh, she's like a waspy white woman and she's in a detention center with all these other people, like, you kind of get it. And there wasn't much more depth to it than that. At least with Not All Men, they tackled it from a lot of different angles. You had, like, men who were really angry and fighting each other. You had men who felt emasculated, so they were lashing out at their wives. You had know-it-all guy in that episode who, like, his toxic masculinity was just, but actually everything. Like, he would always try and bring something to the table and one-up everyone. This one, it was just the same thing the whole time. It was just, what if the way we treated people who are illegal immigrants, but what if they were white? Like, I agree with the message that this is having. Like, we need to treat people humanely and not be vicious towards them regardless of their race. Sure, but you get it once this episode kind of gets going. The minute she's detained, you're like, got it. And it doesn't go any deeper than that. So that's a little unfortunate. This is a little bit of a weaker one, but it's not bad or anything. It's just, you get it once you get it. And I didn't think the performances were so great that they overshadowed that, which a lot of the other episodes this season I thought did. The actress, Jennifer Goodwin, she was in Once Upon a Time, that ABC show, and I like that. She's a good actress. I just didn't think the material she was given was particularly good, so not on her. Although the mask she wore in the episode was definitely based on the pig-faced people from the original series, so that's pretty neat. Episode 9, The Blue Scorpion, with Chris O'Dowd. I really like Chris O'Dowd, and he was really excellent in this episode, so I'm glad they got him. This episode, The Blue Scorpion, is about a man who goes to his father's house, and he discovers his father has committed suicide with a gun. This gun has a blue scorpion on the handle, and the premise is essentially the gun has a mind of its own. It is personified, and it has wants, and he finds this bullet with his name on it as well. The implication being that the gun wants him to kill himself if he mistreats the gun. This episode's about the gun issue in general, but it actually took a fairly balanced view, because most of the episode he is struggling with, like, he has this gun. Is he going to kill himself? Is he going to kill someone else? Because even though the bullet has his name on it, I forget what his name in particular was, but he keeps running into other people every single day who have the same name, implying that he might kill one of them instead of himself, as long as the name on the bullet is the same as the name of the person. And he starts getting more and more obsessed with the gun as the episode goes on. But at the end, he starts stalking his ex-wife, and then the twist, I guess so to speak, is that he does kill someone, but it's in self-defense. So the episode kind of does do a both sides thing. Like, yes, you can get obsessed with guns, and that's not healthy, and you shouldn't personify these things, and you shouldn't, like, put these things up on a pedestal. But at the same time, if someone's attacking you, and you feel threatened for your life, you probably would want a gun. So I found that interesting. At the end of the episode, he does throw the gun away, but some kids pick it up, and it starts all over again, and Jordan Peele does a little ending narration that, as long as we put objects above people, there's always going to be tragedy. Basically just trying to say, even though guns can be useful, it's still probably best if we put some limits on that. Decent episode. Chris O'Dowd is definitely the reason to watch this episode. It's also well written, but I think he really, really nailed it. And then finally, the final episode of the season, the most interesting episode of the season, Blurry Man. This episode is metafictional. It's a story that has a great intro. The intro to this episode is Seth Rogen. He's a writer, and he's like talking to himself about this terrible story he's writing, and it's like really bad, the acting and the writing. And I was like, oh, this episode isn't going to be very good. And it even has like a really trite Twilight Zone twist at the beginning where he writes a story about the apocalypse, and then he opens the window and it is the apocalypse. Oh no. And Jordan Peele comes on to do his narration. But then halfway through the narration, he's like, this isn't working for me, guys. Can we do something else? And the camera pans, and it's a set. And it is Jordan Peele playing himself. It's an episode of The Twilight Zone that takes place on the set of the new Twilight Zone. This episode is such a good idea, I love it. Zazie Beetz is actually the lead in this one. We were led to believe it was going to be Seth Rogen, but that's a bait and switch. Zazie Beetz is actually the main character. She's from Deadpool 2, she was Domino, and a variety of other things, I'd imagine. She's under pressure from Jordan Peele, who plays a hilarious version of himself in this episode. I think it's funny how he, like, allowed himself to be written such an asshole in this episode. Like, he's constantly kind of talking down to people, like his new fame from the movies has gotten to his head, and every time he's, like, walking down the hall, someone hands him a bag of popcorn, and he's just munching on the popcorn constantly, and it's hilarious. I don't know if that's a thing he actually does, like he likes eating popcorn all the time, and he wrote it into the thing, or whoever wrote this wrote it in, but it was a very funny character trait. And he's not happy with what Zazie Beetz has written, and she's so concerned about living up to Rod Serling. It's mentioned many times in this episode. She even has a Rod Serling sticker on her, like, MacBook. And she's like, yeah, the original Twilight Zone was schlocky, but it was always genre fiction that had been elevated by the writing. We need to get above this schlocky crap. And Jordan's like, you know, there's something to be said for schlocky crap. You can tell your story and do both. You can have it be schlocky and campy and silly, and also have a real message in it. And that's sort of her journey throughout the episode, is learning that, hey, you can have these messages and say something as a writer, but also have fun with it. And not only that, you can live up to the original in some way, even if it's not exactly the same. And this is carried through by she's being stalked by this blurry man throughout the episode. And she even goes back, and within the context of the fiction of the episode, they look at the previous episodes of the season, and they're like, this blurry guy's in the background of all these shots. And if you go back, there is a guy standing in those shots in the original episodes, if you go back and watch them, but he's not really blurry, so they did a little bit of a cheat, but whatever. So, she's being stalked by this blurry man. You have, it's definitely an homage to just horror fiction in general, because it's very stereotypical. Like, she's running around, screaming, hiding from the thing, weird stuff's happening, walking around all the sets from the previous episodes, so that's pretty fun reuse of the materials they had on hand. And then at the end of the episode, the most important part of the episode, she's like, this is the end of the episode. She literally says that. She knows she's in a Twilight Zone episode. And the blurry man reveals himself, and it is Rod Serling. Now, here's the thing. I actually like the idea of this, and even the things he says are fine. They get a voice double, the same guy that did the voiceover for the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror at Disney MGM University, Disney MGM Studios. He's a Rod Serling impersonator, and he did the voice. But boy, was the CG uncanny valley. They sort of pull the same thing that Star Wars did with Princess Leia, young Princess Leia, and Tarkin, and some of the Marvel movies have done, but it's on a TV budget, you know? Like, it's better than it would have been 5 years ago, but he still looks too shiny, and it's a little bit creepy, and not like in an intentional way. It's just supposed to be Rod Serling, but he doesn't move quite naturally. I would say it wouldn't age well, but it really isn't aged well, like, today, and it just came out yesterday. But it's a nice little kind of heartwarming moment. The message of the episode is, you know, enjoy the thing you're writing. You can live up to the Twilight Zone of the past while also creating your own thing and moving forward. And she walks with Rod through the Twilight Zone door, and some cool visuals happen, and they're off to do whatever. And the final narration is actually given by the Rod Serling impersonator. He's alright. I can tell it's not Rod, but that's because I watch a lot of the original Twilight Zone. It's one of my background shows if I'm doing something else, so I listen to it constantly. I know what he sounds like. And he kind of has the same problem some people have with William Shatner impersonations, where they do more of an evocation, where it's like, I'm William Shatner. Like, they go over the top. All they know how to do is pause a lot for William Shatner and kind of talk like this. Like, you get it, but it's more of a caricature of what his voice sounds like than what his voice actually sounds like. And the Rod Serling guy did something similar. Like, I can't really reproduce it, but he sort of talked like this as well. I'm Rod Serling. This is the Twilight Zone. Like, Rod Serling had an odd cadence occasionally and would put emphasis on certain words, but he also just talked like a human being, you know what I mean? He wasn't that weird. So, I felt like it was a little off. But as far as a nice homage, I think it's fine. Whether or not you're okay with putting words in a dead man's mouth, your mileage may vary. In this particular case, I'm fine with it, because Rod Serling was always a pretty forward-thinking guy. He enjoyed metafiction to the point that the season finale of the first season of the original Twilight Zone similarly had a fourth wall-breaking gag at the end, where Rod Serling that episode was called A World of His Own, and in it, it turns out a man can make things real by writing fictional stories about them. He can create people. At the very end of the episode, it turns out Rod Serling is one of those people, and then he throws away the paper or whatever that he had written the story of Rod Serling on, and Rod disappeared. So, this seems like a little bit of a nod to that, but I don't know. So this season overall, what did I think? It definitely had problems, especially at first. I was confused about the tone, but the more I watched it, the more I got it. It's definitely aiming to be campy. It's definitely aiming to be over the top. And if you don't like that, I really can't blame you. It's a particular taste, but I kind of feel about this the same way I feel about Star Trek Discovery. In that I feel like this first season, it has some rough patches and bumps, and it's kind of finding its identity, but it's already been renewed for Season 2, which I'm happy about, and I'm hoping Season 2 is able to pull a lot of these more disparate ideas together to have some more consistent stories. Like, there were some really great episodes this season. I mean, I really enjoyed The Comedian. Nightmare at 30,000 Feet was excellent. Replay was good. A Traveler was bad. The Wunderkind was alright, but, you know, it didn't live up to the premise entirely. 6 Degrees of Freedom was fun. Not All Men I enjoyed, but your mileage is going to vary depending on how much you're okay with just hammering the point home. I'm fine with it, so I enjoyed it. Point of Origin was one note, you kind of get it. Blue Scorpion was good, Blurry Man was good. So we're hitting like at least a 70% average here as far as my enjoyment, but I think it'd be cool if we could bump that up, and I think they can do it, especially with Jordan Peele on board. Give him some more story credits this next season, and I think he'll be in a really good spot. I don't know if I want to say it's the best remake of the Twilight Zone so far, because that 80s series has a lot of really good ones, but if they continue with this quality up through Season 2, and perhaps even if it gets a Season 3, yeah, it's not as great as the original, but that's because the original is a classic of television. I mean, you can't be as subversive as the original show was, because it's not the 60s anymore. It's not the time and place, you know what I mean? And as great as Jordan Peele is, Rod Serling had a much more hands-on role in the original Twilight Zone than Peele has here. So, I don't know. I'm enjoying the show. I like it. CBS All Access actually just released all the episodes again, but in black and white. So I'm probably going to rewatch the season over the next couple weeks in black and white, and see if it changes anything. I doubt it. If you don't shoot something for black and white, usually making it black and white doesn't typically help, but we'll see what it does. And yeah, I'm just really glad you guys showed up to hear what I had to say about the rest of the season. Definitely check it out on CBS All Access if you haven't. At least do like the 7-day free trial and just watch these through, and maybe check out Star Trek Discovery if you're a Star Trek fan. Be aware Season 1 is rough, Season 2 is where it gets good. But yeah, thanks everyone for watching. Next time I'm going to be talking about, I think, the upcoming series of Black Mirror episodes. There's 3 new episodes coming out on Netflix. I'm going to go over the trailers and talk about what to expect there. So, hope to see you guys next time.